切是幻觉还是真实？我9级魂导器，这到底是什么地方？是在指引我吗？
想学吗？我只演示一遍。你的审考题目需要自己参悟。
如果被那位知道，
他现在可顾不到我这儿。
Soul Land 2, Episode 145, Rong Nianbing, the god of emotions, appears to open the path to godhood for Huo Yuhao. But little did anyone know this was actually Tang San's scheme. Behind it lies a secret of the god realm. The god of emotions, Rong Nianbing, discovered Huo Yuhao's extraordinary talent in the god realm. After observing him many times, Rong Nianbing decided to pass down the god of emotions' divine position to Huo Yuhao. While Huo Yuhao was cultivating, Rong Nianbing directly pulled Huo Yuhao's soul out and brought it into the god realm. Even beast god Ditian could not stop it. Before a true deity, even Ditian was powerless to prevent Huo Yuhao from being taken away. Originally, Huo Yuhao was meant to be Tang San's successor, but Rong Nianbing interfered midway. While Tang San was in seclusion, he seized the opportunity and chose Huo Yuhao as his own successor. However, this was all part of Tang San's plan. After Huo Yuhao's soul entered the god realm, he found himself standing in a valley. The valley looked ordinary at first glance, but upon closer inspection, everything about it felt unusual. All kinds of flowers bloomed throughout the valley, so beautiful that it was hard to look away. Following a small stone path deeper into the valley, after walking for about 15 minutes, his view suddenly opened up. A pavilion appeared before him. Inside the pavilion sat 2 people. On the left was a young man who looked around 27 or 28 years old. His long golden hair rested on his shoulders, and he was extremely handsome. There was a relaxed yet harmonious aura about him. Across from him sat an elderly man with graying hair, quietly playing chess. Huo Yuhao knew nothing about chess, but he understood one thing. One of these 2 people must be the one who brought his soul to this fairyland-like place. Although he had no idea where this was, since he was already here, he decided to stay calm. He quietly walked to the side of the chessboard and stood silently watching. At that moment, the young man stood up and stretched lazily, then walked toward the other side of the pavilion. As he walked, he beckoned to Huo Yuhao, signaling him to follow. Only then did Huo Yuhao realize this young man's voice was the same voice that had pulled his soul out earlier. Following him down from the pavilion, Huo Yuhao saw a small courtyard not far away. Several children were playing inside. A tall beauty in a red dress was supervising them, while another beauty in a blue dress sat nearby eating something. Both of them had happy smiles on their faces. Seeing this scene, Huo Yuhao felt deeply envious. He wondered when he might be able to form a family like this, with Tang Wutong have several children, and live happily in such a peaceful place. The young man noticed his envy. He smiled and said that even such a life would become lonely after a long time. He had many wives, but they were often not by his side. Only 2 of them were willing to stay here now. The others had all gone out to play, and who knew when they would come back? Huo Yuhao was surprised. He said that 1 wife should be enough. If there were too many, love would be divided. The young man gave a bitter smile. "You're right," he said, "but sometimes life doesn't allow you to choose." They entered a room in the courtyard. It was a very large kitchen. The young man asked Huo Yuhao to stand aside and watch. How much you can comprehend will depend on yourself. Then he walked to the cooking table. Suddenly his entire aura changed. It became as heavy and steady as a mountain. The oppressive feeling made even Huo Yuhao's soul tremble. The young man's right hand flicked slightly, and he selected a small knife. With a gesture of his left hand, an empty plate appeared before him. At the same time, 9 cucumbers of similar size flew toward him. Huo Yuhao felt puzzled. Why use such a tiny knife for cooking? It was even smaller than the engraving knife he used when crafting soul tools. The young man began to chant softly. When the chanting finished, he completed exactly 261 cuts. Even more astonishing was what appeared above the fragments. 9 jade-like carvings rose proudly. 9 vividly lifelike dragon heads, as if they were about to swallow clouds and spit mist. Huo Yuhao was stunned. This knife technique was unbelievably exquisite. He had never seen anything like it. He also used carving knives, but always according to blueprints. This kind of creative blade technique shocked him deeply. The young man turned to the dumbfounded Huo Yuhao and said, "This is today's first dish. Unfortunately, you can't eat it." Huo Yuhao finally snapped out of his daze and praised the knife technique repeatedly, calling it nothing short of divine craftsmanship. The young man asked if he wanted to learn this technique, the Dragon Rain Gathering Dance Knife technique. After years of integration and mastery, he had already reached the realm where all techniques were interconnected. Huo Yuhao immediately said he wanted to learn, but hesitated and asked if there were any conditions. The young man nodded. There is no such thing as a free lunch in this world. This dish is called 9 azure divine dragons hidden in ice clouds. It was my famous signature dish when I first made my debut. The condition is simple. If you want to learn this blade technique, you must inherit my divine position. Hearing the words divine position, Huo Yuhao was shocked. Only then did he realize the person before him was not human, but a god. No wonder he could so easily pull his soul here. This was already the world of gods, so gods truly existed in this world. For a moment, Huo Yuhao was overwhelmed with shock. Although he had always dreamed of becoming a god to grant eternal life to his spirit souls, deep down he had always wondered whether gods truly existed. Now that a real god stood before him, he finally believed everything was real. Seeing his surprise, the young man explained. Because of Huo Yuhao's own comprehension, he had already touched the threshold of the god realm. But going from human to god still required many trials. He explained that the god realm was actually a place where humans whose strength had risen to the level of the elements of heaven and earth resided. As their power grew and their understanding of the great Tao of heaven and earth deepened, they would eventually enter this place. The god realm could be understood as a continent formed purely from condensed energy floating beyond many worlds. In those worlds, no matter how humans cultivated, as long as their strength reached the level recognized by the god realm, and they possessed a divine position, they could ascend here. However, the god realm's territory was limited, and the number of humans it could contain was also limited. Therefore, everyone needed their own position. There were several situations in which divine positions changed hands. For example, some gods might die while pursuing the great Tao, or voluntarily give up their divine position to seek even greater truths in distant worlds. At such times, a successor was needed. The young man said he was in exactly this situation. He needed to pass on his divine position. The god realm they belonged to governed 108 worlds. The Doluo continent where Huo Yuhao lived was one of the high-energy worlds, where it was relatively easy for beings to reach the level of understanding required to become gods. The god realm had a god realm committee consisting of 2 god kings and 3 judges. Below them were the most powerful gods called main gods, and there were 32 of them. The young man was one of those main gods. Therefore, inheriting his divine position would certainly not be a disadvantage for Huo Yuhao. Huo Yuhao then asked why the soul beasts of the great star Dao forest could not become gods. The young man explained. For beasts evolving into gods was far more difficult. It wasn't because the god realm intentionally rejected them. Rather, it was because their understanding of the great Tao of heaven and earth was insufficient. When beasts were first born, their intelligence was relatively low, unless they were high-level beast races like the dragon clan. But even for dragons, their intelligence required time to fully mature. Because of this, the innate ki at birth could not be absorbed by them, and later when they cultivated, their progress became restricted. Although the lifespan of humans is shorter than that of beasts, intelligence is a natural gift. When wisdom combines with innate ki, humans gain greater comprehension and faster progress in cultivation than beasts and other living beings. Huo Yuhao didn't understand why the young man wanted to pass the divine position to him. This place clearly looked like a paradise, and the young man even had family members accompanying him. The young man looked at him with a somewhat complicated expression. After letting out a soft sigh, he said, "Although becoming a god has many advantages, it also has its drawbacks, loneliness. The gods who can truly stay peacefully in the god realm are those who can endure loneliness. In the god realm, you can have anything you want. Instead, that makes happiness feel scarce." After passing on his divine position, he planned to take his family and search for another god realm, to experience the outside worlds. When Huo Yuhao heard that there might be another god realm, his heart trembled. The young man smiled and said, of course. Their god realm governed 108 worlds, but what lay beyond those 108 worlds? The great Tao is boundless. In the distant reaches of space, there must be other god realms as well. That was what he wanted to explore. He had lived in the god realm for many years already. Continuing such a peaceful and uneventful life was not what he desired. After he left, the children would descend to the lower worlds to train, while he would take his lovers with him to search for traces of other god realms. Perhaps one day he might return. Even without a divine position with his ability, he could still create his own small world in the god realm. Huo Yuhao asked why the young man had chosen him. The young man said that he had witnessed everything Huo Yuhao had gone through. In many ways, Huo Yuhao resembled him, but in many other ways, he even surpassed him. He hoped that after inheriting his divine position, Huo Yuhao would go even further and eventually stand at the pinnacle of the god realm. Huo Yuhao then asked what he would have to sacrifice or what trials he would have to undergo. The young man said Huo Yuhao had already experienced many trials. Although those trials were not arranged by him, everything Huo Yuhao had done while passing them had been seen by him. Huo Yuhao's understanding and potential in the ice element, as well as the way he integrated emotions into his soul skills, were the reasons he had chosen him. Of course there would be a test, but the test would not come from him. For now he could plant a seed of divinity in Huo Yuhao. When Huo Yuhao's cultivation reached the appropriate level, he would naturally be guided to the god realm. The final test Huo Yuhao would face would be the one he had already recognized himself: defeat every opponent who tried to stop him from ascending to the god realm. After accomplishing that, he would meet him again. Huo Yuhao had absolutely no reason to refuse. His entire cultivation had always been aimed at eventually reaching the god realm. He asked one more question. If he became a god, could he bring his beloved to the god realm as well? The young man smiled and said, of course. As long as he personally became a god and inherited a main god divine position, he would have the qualification to bring several people closely connected to him into the god realm. In the god realm, just like in any other world, the stronger your power, the greater your authority. If he wanted to bring more people, he would have to work harder. Hearing this, Huo Yuhao's final trace of doubt disappeared. He respectfully said that he was willing to inherit the divine position. The moment the words left his mouth, golden light shone from the young man's body. The same golden light also appeared on Huo Yuhao's soul. His entire body turned golden. The smile on the young man's face disappeared, replaced by a solemn expression. From this moment on, Huo Yuhao is my successor. As a member of the god realm, I cannot interfere with anything in the lower worlds. But after obtaining my divine seed, Huo Yuhao's growth will surely become smoother. My divine position is called emotion. The deeper your understanding of emotions, the smoother your inheritance will be in the future. The young man raised his right hand and slowly pressed his index finger against Huo Yuhao's forehead. Huo Yuhao's entire body trembled violently. His whole being became transparent. It felt as if his soul had been cleansed by a special power. He sensed that his soul power of the soul had changed. Not stronger, but sublimated. This feeling of sublimation was very familiar to him. He had once felt it from the necromancer god Electrolux. This was the aura of divine sense. The young man confirmed, yes, it is divine sense. After accepting the divine seed, the spiritual sense within Huo Yuhao's soul would gradually transform into divine sense, improving as his cultivation improved. However, he warned Huo Yuhao, unless it was a life or death situation, he must never release divine sense. Because if someone were able to seize the divine seed, not only would he die, but the divine position would also be taken away. He must be extremely careful. No one could know that he had obtained the divine seed, not even the people closest to him. Huo Yuhao respectfully agreed. Feeling the continuous transformation of his soul, his heart filled with excitement. The young man continued. Besides the divine seed, he would also give Huo Yuhao 2 items. They would help him grow more smoothly and become the successor sooner. These 2 items would accompany the divine memories and be imprinted into his body, merging with him. The young man reminded him again. Whether in cultivation or emotions focus was his greatest advantage. With a wave of the young man's hand, everything around Huo Yuhao suddenly became unreal. In the next moment, his soul could no longer sense the outside world. Golden light flickered everywhere around him. Everything became unreal. One final sentence echoed in his mind. His divine position was God of emotions. His name was Rong Nianbing. At that moment, the old man reminded Rong Nianbing, what if Tang San finds out? After all, he had taken the successor of God King Tang San, but Rong Nianbing wasn't worried at all. Tang San was currently in seclusion and had no time to concern himself with such matters. Rong Nianbing thought he had simply been lucky to find a successor. But in reality, this was Tang San's scheme. Tang San had already sensed that the God realm was about to face a great catastrophe. He needed Rong Nianbing's support. By letting Rong Nianbing owe him a favor, he could force him to remain in the God realm for another 30 years to help deal with the coming disaster. When Huo Yuhao regained consciousness, he discovered he was still cultivating together with Tang Wutong. Their soul power fused together. In that emotion filled with love, their Haodong power seemed to have advanced further. Within the surging liquid flow of power, the golden vortexes had doubled compared to before. Although these vortexes couldn't compress vast soul power like a soul core, they could carry more soul power than usual. This allowed their soul power to continuously rise as it merged together. Huo Yuhao recalled what had just happened. The golden-haired young man, the fairyland valley, the pavilion, and the divine position of the god of emotions. Was it all an illusion or real? If it was real, it was simply unbelievable. Beast god Di Tian had once sealed him with a reverse scale. But when a true god made a move, Di Tian had absolutely no way to resist. Huo Yuhao immersed his consciousness into his soul power, quietly sensing the changes. Soon he made a shocking discovery. The reason the Haodong power between him and Tang Wutong had become more solid and powerful, and why vortexes occasionally appeared to condense their soul power further, was not because their cultivation method had changed. It was because the soul power itself had changed. Huo Yuhao discovered that within his Zhuantian technique, soul power, there was now an additional layer of strange brilliance. It looked dreamlike and illusory, like black and white energies intertwining within his original soul power.